I'm Mindy Adams, 32. And for 3 years, I've sat quietly at family dinners while my boyfriend's parents treated me like I was beneath them. Last Sunday, when his mother looked me dead in the eye and called me a directionless loser who'll never amount to anything, I felt that familiar sting of humiliation wash over me. His father nodded in agreement, adding that I was dragging their son down. But as I sat there, fork trembling in my hand, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was done being their verbal punching bag, done pretending I was less than I am. Because what they didn't know, what nobody in that pristine dining room knew, was that 6 months ago, I'd quietly purchased the mortgage to their beloved family home. The very roof over their heads belonged to me, and it was time they learned exactly who they'd been calling a loser all these years. Whitman family portraits sat perfectly centered on their marble mantelpiece, all gleaming smiles and coordinated navy blazers. It was the kind of photo that screamed old money and social standing, everything they wanted the world to believe about them. Patricia Whitman, 58, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer pearls, looked every inch the society matriarch. Robert, 62, distinguished, in his $1,000 suit, projected the authority of a successful physician. And there was Marcus, their golden boy, 34. With his Harvard MBA and corporate law position, I'd stared at that portrait countless times over the past 3 years, wondering where exactly I fit into their carefully constructed world. The answer, it seemed, was nowhere. Their suburban mansion in Westchester screamed wealth at every turn. Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers, furniture that costs more than most people's cars. Patricia loved to casually mention the provenance of every piece, this vase from their trip to Venice, that painting from a gallery in Manhattan. It was all calculated to impress and intimidate. Marcus had warned me about his parents' particular brand of elitism when we first started dating. They're a bit traditional, he'd said with that sheepish smile I'd grown to recognize as his way of downplaying their behavior. Traditional was putting it mildly. I came from a different world entirely. My mother was a nurse, my father a high school teacher. We lived in a modest ranch house where the biggest luxury was cable television. I'd worked 2 jobs through college, earned my finance degree through sheer determination, and built my career from nothing. To the Whitmans, that made me unsuitable as Sudua. Gold digger at worst, a social climber at best. Patricia had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "Oh, Mindy, that's such an interesting choice," she'd say about my clothing, my career, my opinions, always delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. Robert was more direct in his dismissal, treating me like I was invisible unless forced to acknowledge my presence. And Marcus, he walked the tightrope between his family's expectations and his feelings for me, never quite choosing his side. He'd make excuses for their behavior afterward, promise things would get better, beg me to be patient. But nothing ever changed. The worst part was how they made their disapproval feel like charity. They'd invite me to family events with the air of people doing me an enormous favor. Patricia would seat me at the far end of the table, include me in conversations just enough to avoid appearing openly rude, then exclude me from family discussions about vacations, investments, or future plans. I'd learned to smile and nod, to keep my opinions to myself, to make myself as small and inoffensive as possible. It was exhausting, this constant performance of gratitude for their tolerance, but that portrait, it haunted me. All those perfect smiles hiding such ugly hearts, all that wealth and privilege used as weapons to make others feel small. I wondered sometimes what they think if they knew the truth about who I really was, what I'd accomplished, what I was capable of. The irony was almost too perfect. While they'd been dismissing me as a nobody, I'd been building something they couldn't even fathom. While they'd been using their inherited wealth to make me feel inferior, I'd been earning my own fortune through intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking. That family portrait would look different soon enough, because I was about to show them exactly what this directionless loser was made of. The birthday cards sat in my dresser drawer like evidence of a slow-motion character assassination. Each year, Patricia's inscriptions grew more pointed, more dismissive. The first year, "Happy birthday, Mindy. Hope this year brings you direction." The second, Another year older, perhaps wiser too. The third just last month. Best wishes for finding your path in life. I could trace the evolution of their disrespect through those cards, watching politeness erode into open contempt dotted. Hadn't started this way. When Marcus first introduced me to his parents 3 years ago, they'd been cordial enough. Patricia had smiled, asked about my work, complimented my dress. Robert had shaken my hand with professional courtesy. I thought maybe Marcus had been exaggerating their snobbery, but the facade cracked quickly. The first real incident happened at Marcus's birthday dinner that spring. I'd been working at the regional bank then, proud of my assistant manager position, even though it wasn't glamorous. When Patricia asked about my career goals, I'd mentioned wanting to start my own financial consulting firm someday. How ambitious, she'd said, but her tone made it sound like a character flaw. I suppose everyone thinks they can be an entrepreneur. These days, Robert had chuckled. The market's rather saturated with financial advisors, isn't it? Most of them barely scraping by. Marcus had jumped in quickly. Mom, Dad, Mindy's really talented with investments. She's helped me reorganize my portfolio. Well, that's nice, dear, Patricia had replied, already turning her attention elsewhere. The message was clear. My dreams were naive. My ambitions laughable. Christmas that year brought the gift incident. I carefully chosen presents for everyone, a vintage medical journal for Robert, a silk scarf from a boutique Patricia had admired, expensive cologne for Marcus. I'd spent more than I could afford because I wanted them to see I respected their family traditions. Their gifts to me. A generic gift card to Target and a self-help book titled Finding Your Purpose After 30. Marcus had been mortified. They didn't know what you'd like, he'd whispered later, but I knew better. The message was calculated. You don't belong here. You're not worth the effort of a thoughtful gift. And by the way, you're obviously lost in life. The comments became a constant drip of poison. At family gatherings, Patricia would ask about my little job at the bank, emphasizing the word little just enough to sting. She'd discuss Marcus's friends who were dating doctors, lawyers, or women from prominent families, always within my earshot. Jennifer Morrison's daughter just got engaged to a pharmaceutical executive. She'd tell Robert while I sat right there. Such a lovely match. Her father owns those medical supply companies, you know? Robert would nod knowingly. It's important to marry within your social circle. Shared values, similar backgrounds. It makes all the difference. When I got promoted to manager, I excitedly shared the news at Sunday dinner. Patricia's response? How nice, dear. I'm sure the additional responsibility will keep you busy. Then she'd immediately change the subject to Marcus's latest case at his law firm. The worst part was watching Marcus navigate these moments. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, give me apologetic looks, try to redirect conversations. But he never directly confronted them. Never said, stop treating Mindy this way. Never set clear boundaries. His approach was always damage control after the fact. They'll come around, he'd promised during our drives home. They just need time to get to know you better. But 3 years had passed, and things had only gotten worse. The cutting remarks became bolder. Patricia started forgetting to invite me to family events, then acting surprised when Marcus brought me anyway. Oh, I thought you'd be working, she'd say with fake concern. I didn't want to assume you could get time off. Robert began treating me like hired help, asking me to refill drinks or clear plates while treating everyone else like guests. When I mentioned it to Marcus, he said I was being oversensitive. They're not trying to be rude, he'd insist. They're just used to a certain way of doing things. But I could see the calculation in their eyes, the satisfaction when their barbs hit home. This wasn't accidental rudeness, it was deliberate cruelty designed to make me disappear. The final straw had been building for months. Their confidence grew with each successful humiliation. Each time Marcus failed to defend me. Each time I swallowed their insults with a smile. They'd forgotten that quiet doesn't mean weak. That patience doesn't mean acceptance. That someone who chooses not to fight back might simply be choosing their battles carefully. Those birthday cards weren't just evidence of their disrespect. They were proof of my restraint. For 3 years, I'd absorbed their abuse while building something they couldn't imagine. While they'd been trying to tear me down, I'd been rising higher than they'd ever dreamed possible. The irony was about to become deliciously clear. The scholarship letter was yellowed now, creased from years of handling, but I kept it in my home office as a reminder of where I'd come from. Congratulations on receiving the Presidential Academic Scholarship, it began. Your exceptional performance and financial need have earned you a full ride to State University. Financial need. Those words had sung then, representing everything my family couldn't provide. Now they felt like a badge of honor, proof that I'd earned everything I had. Growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town, I'd learned early that money was always a source of stress. Dad graded papers at the kitchen table while Mom worked double shifts at the hospital. They never complained, never made me feel guilty about our circumstances, but I understood that every dollar was precious. While my classmates took piano lessons and went to summer camp, I babysit the neighbor kids for spending money. While they worried about prom dresses, I worried about textbook costs. The divide wasn't just financial, it was cultural. Their families discussed college like was inevitable. Mine spoke of it like an impossible dream made possible only through my grades. I wasn't bitter about it. If anything, it gave me focus. While other kids partied, I studied. While they complained about homework, I saw it as my ticket out. It was an investment in my future. Every scholarship application, a lottery ticket to a better life. State University opened worlds I'd never imagined. My roommate, Jessica, came from money, not Whitman-level wealth, but comfortable middle class. Her parents visited regularly, took us out to dinner, treated education like an experience to be enjoyed rather than a privilege to be earned. I loved Jessica, but I envy her ease with everything. She joined sororities, went on spring break, trips, changed her major 3 times because she was finding herself. I worked in the campus bookstore, lived on ramen noodles, and never deviated from my finance track because I couldn't afford to waste time or money, but I had something Jessica didn't: hunger. While she saw college as a 4-year exploration, I saw it as a 4-year job interview for the rest of my life. I devoured every finance course, sought out extra credit opportunities, built relationships with professors who might become references. My junior year, Professor Martinez pulled me aside after a particularly complex derivatives assignment. You have an intuitive understanding of risk assessment that most of my graduate students lack, he said. Have you considered getting your Series 7 certification? I hadn't even known what that was, but I researched it immediately. The securities license would let me handle investment accounts, open doors to better positions. The study materials cost more than my monthly food budget, but I found a way. I took the exam at the end of junior year and passed with flying colors. Suddenly, I wasn't just another finance major, I was someone with actual credentials, real expertise. Regional banks started recruiting me for positions I'd only dreamed about. The job at First National came with a salary that seemed incredible to someone who'd lived on minimum wage and scholarship money. $45,000 a year felt like winning the lottery. I moved into my first real apartment, bought my first professional wardrobe, sent my parents money for the first time in my life. But even as I celebrated these victories, I kept studying. Finance wasn't just my career, it was my obsession. I read the Wall Street Journal every morning, followed market trends, analyzed investment strategies in my spare time. While my coworkers grabbed drinks after work, I attended seminars on tax, law and estate planning. My colleagues thought I was antisocial, maybe a little obsessive. They didn't understand that this wasn't just a job for me, it was everything I worked toward, everything my family had sacrificed for. I couldn't afford to be casual about success the way people born into it could. That's when I started noticing patterns in the bank's loan portfolio, properties in financial distress, mortgages held by people who clearly couldn't sustain the payments, investment opportunities hidden in other people's crises. I began tracking these situations, understanding the cycles of foreclosure and recovery. It was morally complex territory. These were real people losing their homes, facing genuine hardship. But I also saw that smart, ethical intervention could sometimes help everyone involved. A distressed mortgage purchase at the right price could give a struggling homeowner better terms, while providing steady returns for the investor. I started small, pooling my savings with a few like-minded colleagues to purchase a small apartment building whose owner was behind on payments. We restructured the deal to give the original owner better terms while securing our investment. Everyone won. That first success taught me something crucial. I didn't need to inherit wealth to create it. Intelligence, research, and careful risk. Management could generate the kind of returns that trust fund kids took for granted. While the Whitmans had been busy judging my humble origins, I'd been building expertise they couldn't buy. While they'd been coasting on inherited advantages, I'd been developing skills that could generate real wealth. The scholarship letter represented the beginning of a journey they never understand. They saw a girl from a poor family who'd gotten in. Lucky? I saw a young woman who turned limitations into motivation, obstacles into opportunities. That faded piece of paper wasn't just about college. It was about the hunger that privilege could never teach, the drive that comfort could never inspire. It was about becoming everything they assumed I could never be, through nothing but intelligence, determination, and the kind of work ethic that only comes from knowing what it means to have nothing. Soon enough, they'd learn exactly what a scholarship kid could accomplish. The text message thread with Marcus read like a 3-year record of broken promises and empty reassurances. I scrolled through it sometimes when I needed to remind myself why I felt so alone in this relationship, even though I loved him deeply. Sorry. About dinner last night, Dad was stressed about the practice. You know how he gets. Mom didn't mean it that way. She's just protective of family traditions. Give them time, Min. They'll come around and they see how happy you make me. We just keep the peace for now. I promise. I'll talk to them. But he never did talk to them. Not really. Marcus Whitman was a brilliant lawyer who could argue complex cases in front of judges, negotiate million-dollar deals for corporate clients, and command respect in boardrooms across Manhattan. But when it came to his parents, he became a 12-year-old. Boy desperate to avoid conflict, I understood the psychology of it, even if it frustrated me. Marcus had grown up as the family golden child, the Harvard graduate who'd fulfilled every parental expectation. His older sister Rebecca had rebelled in her 20s, moved to California, and rarely spoke to the family. Marcus had stepped into the role of the perfect son, and the pressure to maintain that image controlled every decision he made. They sacrificed so much for my education, he'd tell me during our difficult conversations. Dad worked 18-hour days to pay for private school, law school, everything. I can't just throw that back in their faces. I'm not asking you to throw anything back, I'd reply. I'm asking you to set boundaries, to defend me when they're cruel. They're not cruel, Mindy. They're just particular about who they let into the family circle. That was Marcus in a nutshell, always finding ways to reframe their behavior as something understandable, even reasonable. He'd grown so accustomed to managing their moods and expectations that he couldn't see how abnormal their treatment of me really was. The worst part was that I knew Marcus loved me. When we were alone, he was everything I could want in a partner. Funny, intelligent, thoughtful, affectionate. He remembered every important date, surprised me with little gifts, supported my career ambitions. He was proud of my work, impressed by my financial acumen, genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. But the moment his parents entered the picture, he transformed. All that confidence and assertiveness evaporated, replaced by a desperate need to keep everyone happy. He'd shoot me pleading looks across the dinner table, silently begging me to let their comments slide. He'd change the subject when conversations turned uncomfortable, deflect rather than defend. You don't understand how complicated family dynamics can be, he'd say when I pressed him. You're lucky your parents are so easygoing. Lucky. As if my parents' kindness and acceptance were just random fortune rather than conscious choices about how to treat people. The pattern was exhausting. His parents would humiliate me, I'd feel hurt and angry. Marcus would make excuses for them, and I'd swallow my feelings to keep the peace. Then he'd promise to handle things better next time, and the cycle would repeat. I'd started to wonder if he was embarrassed by me too. Not intentionally, not consciously, but somewhere deep down, did he also think I wasn't good enough for his family? Did he stay with me despite my background rather than because of who I was? These doubts poisoned quiet moments between us. When he talked about his work, I wondered if he wished he was with someone who could match his professional status. When he mentioned colleagues' wives, doctors, lawyers, women from prominent families, I caught the wistful tone in his voice. Sarah Kellerman started her own practice, he'd say. Tom's wife is brilliant, completely self-made. Self-made. The irony was crushing. If only he knew exactly how self-made I really was. But Marcus lived in compartments. There was his work life, his family life, his life with me. He kept them separate, never fully integrating me into his world or standing up for our relationship when it mattered most. The engagement question hung between us like a sword. We'd been together 3 years, living together for 1. Friends asked when we were getting married, and I could see the panic in Marcus's eyes. Not because he didn't want to marry me, but because he knew it would force a reckoning with his parents that he wasn't ready for. When the time is right, he'd say vaguely. When things settle down at work. When my parents get used to the idea. But his parents would never get used to the idea as long as they saw me as beneath their son. And Marcus would never force the issue as long as avoiding conflict remained more important than protecting our relationship. I loved him enough to have been patient for 3 years. I'd absorbed his family's abuse, made excuses for his weakness, hoped that time would solve everything. But that fork trembling in my hand at dinner had awakened something I'd been suppressing. The realization that love without courage isn't enough. Marcus was about to learn, but his careful balancing act was over, that some conflicts can't be avoided, some truths can't be hidden, some choices can't be postponed forever. His world was about to shift dramatically, and he'd have to decide once and for all where his loyalties lay. Because the woman he'd been treating like a secret was about to become impossible to ignore. The business license certificate hung in my home office, officially registering Adams Financial Consulting, LLC. With the state of New York, it was such a simple document. Just a piece of paper with official seals and signatures, but it represented everything the Whitmans thought I could never achieve. I'd started the consulting firm 2 years ago, while still working at the bank. It began innocently enough: coworkers asking for investment advice, friends needing help with their portfolios, neighbors wondering about refinancing options. Word spread quickly that I had a knack for making complicated financial concepts understandable and profitable. What surprised me was how much I enjoyed the work. At the bank, I processed other people's financial decisions. With my own clients, I could be creative, strategic, genuinely helpful. I wasn't just following procedures, I was solving problems, creating opportunities, building wealth for people who trusted my expertise. My first real client was Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow whose husband had left her with a confusing portfolio of investments. The previous advisor had put her money in high-fee mutual funds that were slowly eating away at her retirement savings. I restructured everything, moving her into low-cost index funds and tax-advantaged accounts, but immediately improved her position. You saved my retirement, she told me, tears in her eyes. I thought I'd have to sell the house. That's when I knew this was more than a side hustle. It was my calling. I registered the LLC quietly, keeping my day job for the steady income and health insurance. Evenings and weekends became consulting hours. I built a client base through referrals, word of mouth, and the kind of personalized service that big firms couldn't provide. The work was diverse and fascinating. Young couples buying their first homes, small business owners planning for retirement, divorcees rebuilding their financial lives. Each case taught me something new about market dynamics, human psychology, and the intersection of money and emotion. But it was the distressed property work that really accelerated my growth. I noticed patterns in foreclosure data: certain types of properties, specific financial circumstances, predictable cycles of distress and recovery. There is money to be made in helping both struggling homeowners and smart investors, if you can navigate the ethical complexities carefully. I developed a specialty in mortgage workouts and distressed property investments. When homeowners faced foreclosure, I could sometimes structure deals that let them stay in their homes with better terms, while providing investors with steady returns. When that wasn't possible, I helped clients purchase properties at below market prices, renovate them, and either resell or rent them profitably. The money started adding up faster than I'd expected. My first year, the consulting brought in an extra $30,000, the second year, $60,000. By the third year, I was earning more from Adams financial consulting than from my bank salary, and my client waiting list stretched months ahead. Marcus knew I did some financial consulting on the side, but he had no idea of the scope or success of the business. When he asked about it, I'd downplay the work, just helping a few people with their investments or a little side project. I told myself I was being modest, but honestly, I was protecting myself from his family's inevitable dismissal. How could I explain to people who saw me as a failure that I was building something significant? How could I tell them about my growing client base, my investment successes, my expanding reputation in the financial community? They'd find ways to diminish it, minimize it, make it sound like playing with Monopoly money. So I kept quiet and kept working. I reinvested most of the profits back into the Business Better software, professional development courses, eventually a small office space downtown. I built relationships with real estate agents, mortgage brokers, tax attorneys. I earned my CFP certification, then my CFA designation. I became the kind of financial professional I'd once dreamed of needing. The irony was delicious. While the Whitmans questioned my ambition and competence, I was building a business that served over 200 clients. While they worried about my ability to support their son, I was generating more income than Marcus made at his law firm. While they saw me as a financial burden, I was managing millions of dollars in client assets. My specialty in distressed mortgage had taught me to spot financial trouble long before it became obvious. I could read between the lines of credit reports, recognize the warning signs of over-leveraging, predict which property owners were headed for serious problems. That's how I'd first noticed the Whitman family situation. Started as curiosity more than anything else. I knew Robert's medical practice wasn't as successful as he pretended, knew they'd taken on debt to maintain their lifestyle. When I saw their property listed in the distressed mortgage databases I monitored, I couldn't resist digging deeper. What I found was fascinating and heartbreaking in equal measure. The perfect facade they maintained was built on increasingly shaky financial ground. The mortgage they'd taken on their paid-off home was just the beginning of a debt spiral that would eventually consume everything they built. I could have walked away, pretended I'd never seen the information. But something about their arrogance, their certainty that they were superior to everyone around them, made me curious about how far their financial house of cards extended. That's when I realized I was in a position to do something unprecedented, something that would change the entire dynamic of our relationship, level the playing field in ways they'd never see coming. The business license certificate represented, more than legal registration, it represented power. The power to help people, to build wealth, to solve problems, to change lives. Soon enough, the Whitmans would discover exactly how much power their son's directionless girlfriend had quietly accumulated, and they'd learned that underestimating someone can be a very expensive mistake. The overdue property tax notice had been stuffed hastily into a kitchen drawer, but I'd seen it during one of our Sunday dinners when Patricia asked me to fetch napkins. The bright red final notice stamp and the amount $47,000 told a story. The Whitmans desperately didn't want anyone to know about Robert Whitman's medical practice, once thriving, had been hemorrhaging money for years. The writing was on the wall for anyone who knew how to read the signs. Insurance reimbursements had dropped, younger doctors with more modern practices were stealing patients, and Robert's refusal to adapt to new technologies had left him increasingly irrelevant. But instead of adjusting their lifestyle or addressing the problems, the Whitmans had doubled down on denial. They'd taken out a mortgage on their house they'd owned free and clear for 15 years to maintain their standard of living. The initial loan was for $800,000, ostensibly for renovations and investments. But I knew better. Patricia's shopping habits hadn't changed despite their declining income. The designer handbags, the weekly spa appointments, the expensive dinners, At exclusive restaurants, she treated money like an endless resource even as it drained away. She developed a particular talent for justifying every purchase as necessary for maintaining professional appearances or important for networking. Robert was equally delusional about their situation. Instead of scaling back his practice or finding new revenue streams, he'd made increasingly desperate investment decisions. I'd heard him bragging to Marcus about his aggressive growth portfolio, which I recognized as the kind of high-risk gambling that destroyed more fortunes than it created. "Your father's always been brilliant with investments," Patricia would say proudly, apparently oblivious to the fact that their net worth had been declining for 3 straight years. The property tax situation was just the most visible symptom of deeper problems. Through my professional connections, I'd learned about the unpaid vendor bills, the overdue insurance premiums, the credit card debt that was spiraling out of control. The Whitmans weren't just struggling, they were in free fall. What made it particularly tragic was how preventable it all was. Robert could have sold the practice to a younger doctor and retired comfortably. Patricia could have adjusted her spending to match their actual income rather than their imagined wealth. They could have downsized, restructured, made the kind of sensible financial decisions that would have preserved their security. Instead, they'd chosen pride over pragmatism, appearances over reality. They'd rather risk losing everything than admit they needed to change their lifestyle. The mortgage situation was especially telling. They'd gone with a variable rate loan, attracted by the initially low payments, apparently not understanding that rates would rise. When the payments increased, they'd refinanced again, this time taking out even more money to pay off credit cards and other debts. It was a classic debt spiral, the kind I'd seen destroy families before. Each financial decision made the next one more desperate, more risky, more likely to accelerate their decline. They were robbing their future to pay for their present, mortgaging their security to maintain an illusion. Marcus had no idea how bad things were. His parents had become experts at hiding their desperation behind carefully maintained facades. When he asked about their finances, they'd wave him off with vague assurances about portfolio adjustments and temporary cash flow issues. "Dad's just being conservative with his investments," Marcus would tell me when I gently probed about his parents' situation. "He's always been cautious about market volatility." Cautious. If only he knew about the risky stock options, the speculative real estate investments, the desperate attempts to generate quick returns that characterized Robert's recent financial behavior. The most painful part was watching them blame external factors for their problems. Insurance companies were greedy, the economy was unstable, young doctors didn't understand quality patient care. Everything was someone else's fault, never the result of their own poor decisions or refusal to adapt. Patricia had started making subtle comments about expensive gifts being tight this year, but she'd immediately follow up with explanations about how they were restructuring their investment portfolio or taking advantage of market opportunities. She couldn't admit financial difficulty without somehow making it sound like a sophisticated business strategy. Robert had begun asking Marcus for small loans, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always framed as temporary cash flow issues, just until the insurance payments come through or while we're waiting for the investment to mature. Marcus, dutiful son that he was, never questioned these requests or asked for repayment timelines. I could see the progression clearly. They'd borrowed against their house to maintain their lifestyle, used credit to cover the increased mortgage payments, and were now beginning to tap their son for additional support. Each step made sense in isolation, but together they formed a pattern of financial self-destruction. The property tax notice represented a crucial tipping point. When homeowners can't pay their taxes, the municipality can seize the property. The Whitmans were literally months away from losing the house they'd used as collateral for their spending spree. They had no idea how close they were to disaster, or that their son's directionless girlfriend was monitoring their situation with professional interest. They certainly couldn't imagine that someone they considered so far beneath them had the knowledge and resources to potentially help or hurt them. The overdue notice sitting in that kitchen drawer wasn't just a bill, it was evidence of everything wrong with their approach to money, relationships, and life. It was proof that all their arrogance and condescension was built on foundations of sand. Soon enough, they'd learn that financial reality doesn't care about social status, and that underestimating people can cost far more than they'd ever imagined. The mortgage purchase agreement was 23 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple fact. Adams Financial Holdings, LLC, now owned the debt on 47 Maple Ridge Drive, Westchester, New York. The Whitman family home, with all its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, now owed its monthly payments to me. I'd been tracking distressed mortgage opportunities for months, but seeing the Whitman property appear in the database felt like destiny. Their original lender, original bank struggling with its own financial difficulties, was selling off problematic loans to recover capital. The Whitman's mortgage, with its variable rate and increasingly strained payment history, was exactly the kind of asset banks wanted to remove from their books. The due diligence process felt surreal. I was analyzing my boyfriend's family home like any other investment property, reviewing payment histories, assessing market values, calculating risk factors. The numbers told a story of steadily deteriorating finances hidden behind a facade of affluence. Their mortgage balance was $847,000 against a home currently valued at around $1.2 million reasonable equity under normal circumstances, but the Whitman situation was far from normal. They'd been late on 3 of the last 6 payments, paid the minimum amount each time, and showed every sign of owners in financial distress. The purchase price was $720,000, a significant discount that reflected the lender's eagerness to transfer the risk and the borrower's questionable ability to pay. For me, it represented an opportunity to earn steady returns while potentially helping a family in crisis. Though they had no idea help was coming from someone they considered beneath them, I structured the purchase through my LLC to maintain anonymity. The Whitmans would receive notice that their mortgage had been sold to a new servicer, but they'd have no way of knowing the ultimate owner was someone they saw every Sunday at family dinner. The ethical complexity of the situation wasn't lost on me. On one hand, I was making a sound business decision based on publicly available information. Distressed mortgage investing was a legitimate field that often helped struggling homeowners by providing more flexible terms than institutional lenders could offer. On the other hand, I was using inside knowledge about the Whitmans' financial situation and personal dynamics to gain advantage in ways they couldn't imagine. I knew things about their spending habits, their pride, their refusal to acknowledge reality that would never appear in any credit report. But every time my conscience wavered, I remembered 3 years of condescension and cruelty. I thought about Patricia's smug superiority, Robert's dismissive attitude, the way they treated me like charity case at their dinner table. They'd used their perceived financial superiority as a weapon to humiliate me, never imagining that their victim might be more financially sophisticated than they were. The purchase process took 6 weeks of paperwork, legal reviews, and regulatory approvals. I worked with attorneys who specialized in mortgage transfers, ensuring every detail was handled correctly. The transaction had to be bulletproof both legally and ethically. During those weeks, Sunday dinners became surreal experiences. I'd sit at their table, listening to Robert complain about difficult patients or Patricia discuss their upcoming vacation plans, knowing things about their financial reality that they didn't even know themselves. I knew their mortgage payment schedule better than they did, understood their cash flow problems more clearly than their own accountant. The final closing happened on a Tuesday morning in my attorney's office. I signed dozens of documents, transferred $720,000 from my business accounts, and officially became the holder of a mortgage that would generate roughly $8,000 per month in payments, if the Whitmans could make them. But the real value wasn't in the monthly income. It was in the power dynamic that shifted. The family that had spent 3 years making me feel small and insignificant now owed their housing security to my financial decisions. The people who'd questioned my competence and ambition were now dependent on someone they'd never bothered to understand. I'd structured the purchase to give me maximum flexibility in dealing with the borrowers. If they continued making payments on time, I'd collect steady returns and they'd never know who was benefiting from their mortgage payments. If they fell behind, I had options ranging from workout agreements to foreclosure proceedings. More importantly, I now had information they desperately needed. I understood their financial situation better than they did, could see problems approaching that they were blind to, had resources that could help or hurt them depending on how they chose to treat me. The mortgage purchase agreement represented more than a business transaction, it was a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The people who'd assumed I had nothing to offer were now, quite literally, paying me for the privilege of living in their own home. I felt a mixture of satisfaction, anxiety, and anticipation as I walked out of the attorney's office that Tuesday. I'd spent months planning this moment, but now that it had arrived, the weight of what I'd done was overwhelming. Marcus had no idea that his girlfriend now held the financial future of his family in her hands. His parents certainly couldn't imagine that the woman they'd called a loser that very week was now their mortgage holder. The agreement was signed, the money transferred, the power dynamics forever altered. All that remained was deciding when and how to reveal this new reality to the people who'd underestimated me so completely. The anonymous investor phase was over. Soon enough, it would be time for the Whitmans to meet their new mortgage holder face to face. The wine glass stain on Patricia's pristine white tablecloth would serve as a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. It happened when Robert knocked over his glass during his animated explanation of why I was dragging Marcus down, professionally and socially. The evening had started badly and deteriorated from there. Patricia had seated me at the far end of the table, as usual, positioned me so I faced the kitchen while everyone else enjoyed the view of their landscaped gardens. She'd prepared my least favorite meal osso buca with risotto, despite knowing I preferred lighter fare, then made a show of asking if I needed her to explain the Italian preparation. "It's a sophisticated dish," she'd said with that practiced smile. "Perhaps more complex than you're used to." Marcus had shot me a warning look, silently pleading for patience. 3 years of the same dynamic, the same desperate hope that this time would be different, the same disappointed realization that nothing had changed. But tonight felt different from the moment I walked through their front door. Maybe it was knowing that I held their mortgage, or maybe I'd simply reached my breaking point, but I found myself studying them with new eyes. Robert's slightly frayed shirt cuff that he thought no one would notice. Patricia's nervous habit of touching her pearl necklace when money came up in conversation, the way they both avoided looking directly at the stack of mail on the side table that probably contained more overdue notices. They looked smaller somehow, less intimidating. Their grand house felt more like an elaborate stage set than a home, all props and performance with very little substance underneath. "Mindy's been working extra hours at the bank," Marcus offered during the appetizer course, trying to include me in the conversation. "She's doing really well with her client portfolio." Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Client portfolio? I thought you were in customer service." "I'm a financial manager," I corrected gently. "I handle investment accounts and provide financial planning services." Robert chuckled in that patronizing way that made my teeth clench. "Well, that sounds very important, though I imagine the bank limits how much ... creativity ... they allow in those roles." "Actually, I also run my own consulting practice," I said, surprising myself with the decision to share this. "I work with clients on investment strategies and property acquisitions." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia and Robert exchanged one of their meaningful looks, the kind that communicated volumes without words. "How ambitious," Patricia finally said, using the same tone she might use to describe a child's finger painting. "I'm sure that keeps you busy on weekends." "It does." "Last month, I helped a client restructure a distressed mortgage situation, save them from foreclosure while providing excellent returns for the investors involved." I watched Robert's face carefully as I said this. Did he recognize the terminology? Did he understand that I was describing exactly the kind of situation his family was heading toward? "Foreclosures can be so tragic," Patricia said with manufactured sympathy. "Those poor people who get in over their heads financially. It's usually a result of poor planning, don't you think?" The irony was so thick I could taste it. Here was a woman whose family was months away from their own potential foreclosure, lecturing me about other people's poor financial planning. Sometimes, I agreed, but often it's a result of unexpected circumstances. Medical bills, job loss, market downturns. Even successful people can find themselves in difficult situations if they're over-leveraged. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Patricia's hand went to her pearl necklace. Well, that's why it's important to marry within your social circle, Patricia said, steering the conversation toward familiar territory. People with similar backgrounds and financial understanding. It prevents so many complications. Marcus cleared his throat. Mom, I don't think. No, let her finish, I interrupted, feeling something dangerous rising in my chest. I'd like to hear more about this theory. Patricia smiled, sensing an opportunity to deliver one of her favorite lectures. It's simply a matter of compatibility, dear. When people come from similar circumstances, they share values about money, family, social responsibilities. They understand each other's worlds. And when they don't share those backgrounds, I asked, well, then you often find that one person is, how should I put this delicately, more of a liability than an asset to the relationship. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus looked mortified, but he didn't contradict her. Robert nodded approvingly, apparently pleased with his wife's diplomacy. That's when Patricia decided to go for the kill. I hope you don't take this personally, Mindy, but we've been concerned about Marcus's future. He has so much potential, such wonderful opportunities ahead of him. We just worry that he might be limiting himself by dating someone like me. I finished for her. Well, yes. Someone without the background to really understand his world. Someone who might be more interested in what he can provide than what she can contribute. The accusation of gold digging hung between us, unspoken but perfectly clear. You think I'm with Marcus for his money, I said quietly. I think you're a lovely girl, Patricia replied with false kindness. But I also think you're in over your head. This isn't your world, dear. You don't understand how these relationships work, what's expected, what's required. Robert decided to pile on. Marcus needs a partner who can match his professional success. Someone who brings something significant to the table. No offense, but working at a bank and playing with investment advice on weekends isn't exactly what? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Substantial, Robert finished. It's not substantial contribution to a serious relationship. That's when he knocked over his wine glass, red liquid spreading across Patricia's perfect white tablecloth like blood. The stain seemed to symbolize everything that was wrong with this moment. This family, this entire 3-year charade as Patricia fussed over the stain and Robert made awkward apologies. I sat perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold. My fork was trembling in my hand, but not from nervousness anymore. It was from rage, from 3 years of accumulated humiliation, finally reaching its breaking point. You know what I think? I said quietly, my voice cutting through their commotion. They all turned to look at me, surprised by the steel in my tone. I think you're right about one thing. This relationship does require substantial contribution from both partners. And I think it's time Marcus learned exactly what I bring to the table. Marcus looked confused. Patricia and Robert looked annoyed that I was interrupting their wine crisis, but none of them looked prepared for what was coming next, because the girl they just called insubstantial was about to show them exactly how substantial $847,000 in mortgage debt could be when it was held by someone they consistently underestimated and routinely humiliated. The wine stain on the tablecloth would dry and fade, but the memory of this dinner would haunt them all forever. My car keys felt like weapons in my trembling hands as I walked to the driveway, leaving behind a dinner table full of shocked silence. I hadn't finished my meal, hadn't said goodbye, hadn't performed any of the polite rituals that usually ended these torturous evenings. For the first time in 3 years, I'd simply stood up and left. The drive home passed in a blur of rage and revelation. Every red light gave me time to replay Patricia's words, someone who might be more interested in what he can provide than what she can contribute. Every turn brought fresh waves of anger at Robert's dismissive assessment of my career as not substantial. But underneath the fury was something else, a cold, calculating clarity that surprised me with its intensity. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done. My phone buzzed constantly during the 20-minute drive. Marcus calling, texting, leaving. Voicemails that I didn't want to hear yet. I knew what they'd contain: apologies, explanations, promises that things would be different. The same script we performed dozens of times before, but tonight felt different because I felt different. That trembling fork had been my tipping point. The moment when 3 years of accumulated humiliation finally exceeded my capacity for patience. I had reached my limit, and there was no going back. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for several minutes, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The apartment building was modest but well-maintained in a neighborhood that was safe and convenient without being prestigious. It was exactly the kind of place that would confirm Patricia's worst assumptions about my social status, which made it perfect for what I was planning. The irony was almost too delicious. While the Whitmans lived in their marble mansion, drowning in debt they couldn't acknowledge, I lived within my means in a place I could easily afford. While they leveraged themselves into financial crisis to maintain appearances, I'd built real wealth through intelligence and hard work. My phone rang again. Marcus's name on the screen, probably calling from his childhood bedroom like a teenager who'd been grounded. This time I answered. Mindy, thank God, where are you? Are you okay? I'm home, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I'm fine. Look, I am so sorry about tonight. I had no idea they were going to. Yes, you did. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Maybe not the specific words, but you knew exactly what kind of people they are. You've known for 3 years. They were way out of line tonight. I told them so after you left. I made it clear that after I left. I repeated the phrase slowly, letting it sink in. You told them after I left. Not when it was happening. Not when I needed you to defend me. After. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the conversations we'd avoided, all the confrontations he'd ducked, all the times he'd chosen the path of least resistance over standing up for our relationship. I know I should have said something sooner, he finally admitted. I just it's complicated with them. They've been having financial stress, and Mom gets defensive when financial stress? I almost laughed. Marcus, your parents aren't having financial stress. They're in financial crisis. There is a difference. What do you mean? Here was my opening, the moment to begin revealing truths that would shatter his carefully compartmentalized world. But I held back. Not yet. Not over the phone. It doesn't matter what I mean, I said instead. What matters is that you've spent 3 years asking me to be patient with people who treat me like garbage. You've asked me to understand their perspective, to make allowances for their behavior, to essentially accept being treated as less than human because it's easier than confronting them. That's not fair. I've tried to. You've tried to manage the situation, I interrupted. You've tried to keep everyone happy. You've tried to avoid difficult conversations. But you've never actually tried to protect me or defend our relationship. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably sitting on his old twin bed surrounded by his high school trophies and college pennants, trying to figure out how to smooth over another family crisis. I love you, he said quietly. You know that, right? I know you think you do. But love without courage isn't enough, Marcus. Love that only exists when it's convenient isn't really love at all. What are you saying? I'm saying that things have to change. Fundamentally, completely change. Not gradually, not eventually, not when the timing is better. Now. Okay, he said quickly. Yes, absolutely. I'll talk to them tomorrow. I'll make it clear that no more talking, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. No more managing. No more trying to keep everyone happy. Either you choose us, our relationship, our future, our partnership, or you choose them and their dysfunction, but you don't get to have both anymore. The ultimatum surprised even me. I hadn't planned to draw such a clear line, but hearing myself say it, I knew it was exactly right. 3 years of compromise and patience had taught me that some people only understand absolute positions. I choose you, he said immediately. Of course I choose you. I've always chosen you. No, you've chosen the path of least resistance. You've chosen to avoid conflict. You've chosen to hope that somehow, magically, everything will work itself out without you having to take a stand. So, what do you want me to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? What would constitute sufficient change to salvage our relationship? What would prove that he was finally ready to be the partner I needed? I want you to understand who you're really dealing with, I said slowly. All of you. I want you to see past the assumptions and prejudices and recognize what's actually happening in your family. I don't understand. You will, I promised. Very soon, you're all going to understand exactly who you've been underestimating. I hung up before he could respond, before he could launch into another round of promises and explanations. The time for words was over. The time for truth was beginning. I sat in my car for another few minutes, watching the lights in other apartments, wondering about the lives being lived behind those windows. Normal families having normal conversations, couples working through ordinary problems without the weight of class warfare and financial secrets. Soon enough, the Whitmans would learn that their biggest problem wasn't their son's choice in girlfriends. Their biggest problem was that they'd spent 3 years humiliating someone who held their financial future in her hands. And tomorrow, I would begin showing them exactly what that meant. The legal brief sat on attorney Sarah Chan's desk like a roadmap to justice, outlining my rights and options as the holder of the Whitman family mortgage. I called her first thing Monday morning, requesting an urgent consultation about a sensitive matter involving personal relationships and business interests. Sarah specialized in real estate law and mortgage situations, and I'd worked with her before on client deals. She was sharp, ethical, and had no patience for legal gray areas or questionable tactics. If anyone could help me navigate this situation properly, it was her. This is certainly unusual, she said, reviewing the mortgage documents I'd brought. You own the mortgage on your boyfriend's family home, and they have no idea? That's correct. The purchase was made through my LLC, and the servicing is handled by a third party. As far as they know, their loan was simply sold to another institutional investor. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. Walk me through your motivations here, Mindy. Are we talking about a business decision that happens to involve people you know, or is this personal? I appreciated her directness. Both. It started as a legitimate investment opportunity. The mortgage appeared in distressed loan databases I monitor regularly. But yes, there's definitely a personal element. Tell me about the personal element. I explained 3 years of humiliation, the pattern of abuse disguised as concern, the way Marcus's family had systematically tried to make me feel inferior and unwelcome. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. And last night was the breaking point. They essentially called me a gold digger who was dragging their son down. Made it clear they think I'm not substantial enough to be part of their family. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What do you want to accomplish here? What's your end goal?" That was the question I've been wrestling with since leaving their house. I want them to understand who they've been dealing with. I want them to see that their assumptions about me were completely wrong, and I want them to treat me with basic human respect. And if they don't, I thought about this too. Then at least Marcus will see whose parents really are when they're forced to deal with someone who has actual power in their lives. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and began outlining my options. As the mortgage holder, you have several rights. You can modify payment terms, you can demand full disclosure of their financial situation. You can accelerate the loan if they default, and ultimately you can foreclose if necessary. I don't want to foreclose on them. Good, that's important to establish upfront. But you do want them to know you have that power? I want them to understand the reality of their situation. They've been living in denial about their finances while using their imagined superiority to hurt people. It's time for a reality check. Sarah made more notes. Here's what you need to understand about disclosure. You have no legal obligation to reveal your identity as the mortgage holder. The loan was purchased legitimately, the transfer was properly recorded, and your anonymity is protected. But if I choose to reveal myself, that's your right as well. You can contact them directly, have your attorney contact them, or arrange a meeting through the loan servicer. The key is that any actions you take must be within the bounds of normal mortgage holder rights. She pulled up relevant statutes on our computer. You cannot harass them. You cannot make threats. You cannot demand anything beyond what's specified in the mortgage agreement. But you can absolutely require them to deal with you as their lender. What about modification options? That's where it gets interesting. If they're struggling to make payments and the file suggests they are, you could offer to restructure the loan. Better terms, lower payments, extended repayment periods. It would be a genuine benefit to them while establishing your position as someone who holds significant influence over their lives. I hadn't considered this angle. So I could actually help them while making my point? Exactly. It would demonstrate both your financial sophistication and your willingness to be reasonable. Much more powerful than punitive actions, Sarah continued outlining possibilities. You could also require regular financial disclosure, demand proof of income, require approval for any additional borrowing secured by the property. These are all standard mortgage holder rights, and all things that would force them to acknowledge my role in their lives. Precisely. The question is how you want to handle the revelation. Surprise confrontation? Formal notification? Gradual disclosure through the loan servicer? I thought about the dinner table scene. Patricia's smug superiority, Robert's dismissive arrogance. I think they deserve to be surprised. They've been surprising me with their cruelty for 3 years. I understand the impulse, but let me advise caution. The goal is to change their behavior and gain their respect, right? Not to humiliate them or create lasting family trauma. She was right, and I knew it. What do you recommend? A family meeting. Formal, but not confrontational. You request the meeting. You control the agenda. You reveal the situation professionally. Let the facts speak for themselves rather than staging a dramatic confrontation. Sarah began drafting a timeline. Give yourself a few days to prepare. Decide exactly what you want to say, what outcomes you're hoping for, what compromises you're willing to make. Then arrange the meeting through Marcus. He should be told first anyway. You think I should tell Marcus before his parents? Absolutely. He's your partner. He deserves to know before anyone else. And honestly, his reaction will tell you a lot about whether this relationship is worth fighting for. That hit harder than I'd expected. What do you mean? If he's genuinely supportive when he learns what you've accomplished and how his parents have been treating you, that's one thing. If he's angry at you for keeping secrets or worried about his parents' feelings more than yours, well, that tells you something different. The consultation continued for another hour, covering legal technicalities, ethical considerations, and practical strategies. Sarah agreed to prepare documentation establishing my authority as mortgage holder, draft potential modification agreements, and research precedents for similar situations. One final piece of advice, she said as I gathered my papers. Remember that you're not doing this to prove you're better than them. You're doing it to establish that you deserve basic respect and consideration. Keep that distinction clear in your mind. Walking out of Sarah's office, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. The legal brief in my briefcase represented more than just documentation. It was a blueprint for fundamentally changing the power dynamics that had controlled my life. For 3 years, the Whitmans had used their perceived financial superiority as a weapon against me. Now they were about to learn that the woman they dismissed as financially insignificant held the keys to their most valuable asset. Justice was about to be served, and it would be completely legal, thoroughly documented, and absolutely devastating. To their sense of superiority, they called me insubstantial. Time to show them exactly how substantial $847,000 in mortgage debt could be. My handwritten notes covered 3 pages of legal pad, mapping out every detail of how to reveal the truth to the Whitman family. I'd been working on the strategy for 2 days, refining my approach, anticipating their reactions, preparing for every possible response dot at the top of the first page. I'd written my primary objective: establish respect and equal treatment, not revenge. Sarah's advice about maintaining the moral high ground had resonated with me. This wasn't about humiliating them. It was about ending their ability to humiliate me. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon and I'd seem reactive, emotional, driven by anger rather than principle. Too late and I'd lose the momentum of Sunday's dinner disaster. I decided on Thursday evening enough time for the family to settle back into their routines, but close enough to the incident to maintain emotional relevance. The location was crucial too, not their house, where they controlled the environment and could dismiss me as an unwelcome guest. Not my apartment, which would reinforce their assumptions about my modest lifestyle. I'd chosen a conference room at Sarah's law office, neutral territory that would underscore the serious business nature of what we were discussing. My notes outlined 3 phases for the revelation. Phase 1, context setting. I'd begin by acknowledging the Sunday dinner incident and its impact on our relationship. This wasn't about relitigating old grievances, but about establishing that fundamental change was necessary for us to move forward. Phase 2, capability demonstration. Before revealing the mortgage situation, I present my actual professional accomplishments. The business license, client testimonials, financial statements showing my company's growth and success. They needed to understand that their assumptions about my capabilities were completely wrong. Phase 3, power revelation. Only after establishing my competence would I reveal that I own their mortgage. The documentation would speak for itself: mortgage, agreement, payment history, legal authority as their lender. I'd spent considerable time crafting the opening statement. I've asked you all here because Sunday's dinner made it clear that we need to address some fundamental misunderstandings about who I am and what I bring to this family. Professional but not aggressive. Clear without being confrontational. The kind of language that established seriousness without giving them an excuse to dismiss me as emotional or unreasonable. The hardest part was anticipating their responses. Patricia would likely go into damage control mode, trying to minimize the significance of owning their mortgage or finding ways to make it seem less important than it was. Robert might get angry, feel tricked or manipulated, possibly question the ethics of my investment decision. Marcus was the wild card. His reaction would determine whether our relationship survived this revelation. If he supported me, stood up to his parents, acknowledged that their treatment of me had been unacceptable, we might have a future together. If he sided with them, felt betrayed by my secrecy, or prioritized their feelings over mine, well, that would tell me everything I needed to know. I prepared responses to likely objections. You should have told us. I had no obligation to disclose my business investments, especially to people who repeatedly question my professional competence. This feels deceptive. No more deceptive than pretending to respect someone while systematically undermining them at family gatherings. You're using our financial situation against us. I'm using my professional expertise to address a business opportunity. The personal connection is incidental. The key was remaining calm, factual, professional. Let them be emotional. I would be the adult in the room, the one dealing with reality while they process the collapse of their assumptions. I also prepared compromise positions. If they could acknowledge their past behavior and commit to treating me with genuine respect, I was prepared to offer them favorable mortgage modification terms, lower interest rates, extended payment periods, whatever would help stabilize their financial situation while establishing our new dynamic. But if they remained defensive, dismissive, or hostile, if they couldn't accept that the power balance had fundamentally shifted, then I was prepared to exercise my full rights as their mortgage holder. Regular financial disclosures, approval requirements for new debt, the kind of oversight that would force them to acknowledge my role in their lives. The nuclear option for closure remained in my back pocket, but I hoped never to use it. The threat would be implicit, understood without being stated. They were smart enough to recognize that their housing security now depended on maintaining a civil relationship with someone they'd spent 3 years abusing. My notes included specific documentation. I'd bring the mortgage purchase agreement, payment history, legal brief outlining my rights, business financial statements, client testimonials, professional certifications, everything needed to establish both my authority and my competence. I'd also prepare materials for potential next steps. If they wanted to discuss mortgage modification, I had preliminary terms ready. If they needed time to process the information, I had a timeline for follow-up discussions. If Marcus needed to talk privately about our relationship, I had specific points I wanted to address. The most important note on the final page was underlined 3 times. Stay focused on the future, not the past. This wasn't about punishing them for 3 years of bad behavior. It was about establishing a foundation for better behavior going forward. They'd made their assumptions about me based on incomplete information and class prejudice. Now they'd have complete information about my capabilities, my resources, and my position in their lives. What they did with that information would determine whether we could build a functional family relationship or whether the fundamental incompatibility was too deep to overcome. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 6 p.m. I told Marcus only that I needed to discuss something important with his whole family, that it related to Sunday's dinner, and that it required everyone's full attention. Should I be worried? He'd asked. You should be prepared for some surprises, I'd replied. That was an understatement. The Whitmans were about to learn that the biggest surprise of all was discovering who they'd really been dealing with. For the past 3 years, my handwritten notes represented more than strategy. They represented a fundamental shift in how I saw myself in relation to this family. No longer the supplicant hoping for acceptance. No longer the outsider begging for inclusion. Tomorrow, I would be the one calling the meeting, setting the agenda, controlling the conversation. Tomorrow, the Whitmans would finally meet the real Mindy Adams. The engagement ring box sat between us on my coffee table like an unexploded bomb, its black velvet surface reflecting the uncertainty that had settled over our relationship. Marcus had brought it to show me his serious intentions, but now it seemed to mock the very foundation of our 3-year partnership. I told him I needed to share something important before Thursday's family meeting, something that would change everything between us. He'd arrived at my apartment expecting a conversation about Sunday's dinner, maybe a discussion about setting boundaries with his parents. He wasn't prepared for what I was about to reveal. Before I tell you what I'm going to tell your family tomorrow night, I need you to understand that I've kept this private not because I was ashamed of it, but because I was protecting it from exactly the kind of judgment your parents have shown me. Marcus leaned forward, confusion creasing his brow. Mindy, you're scaring me. What's going on? I pulled out my business portfolio, financial statements, client testimonials, documentation of Adams Financial Consulting's growth over the past 3 years. This is what's going on. This is who I actually am. For the next 20 minutes, I walked him through my professional accomplishments. The consulting business that generated more annual income than his law firm salary. The client base of over 200 people who trusted me with their financial planning. The certifications and licenses that qualified me to handle complex investment strategies. Marcus stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. You told me you did some consulting on the side. I told you I did consulting work. You assumed it was small scale because that fit your family's narrative about my capabilities. But why didn't you tell me how successful you were? Because every time I mentioned professional accomplishments, your parents found ways to diminish them. Remember when I got promoted to manager? Your mother changed the subject to discuss your latest case. When I mentioned wanting to start my own practice, your father lectured me about market saturation. I could see him processing this, recognizing the patterns he'd been blind to for years. You learned not to share good news with them because they couldn't handle the idea that I might be more successful than they'd assumed. And he never pushed back, never defended my achievements, never made space for my professional identity in family conversations. I was trying to keep the peace. You were enabling their abuse, I said firmly, and teaching me that my accomplishments weren't worth defending. Marcus picked up one of the financial statements, studying the numbers, with his lawyer's attention to detail. Jesus, Mindy, you're generating serious money here. Why have you been living so modestly? Because I'm not interested in keeping up appearances. Because I'd rather build real wealth than pretend to have wealth. Because I learned financial discipline from necessity, not privilege. He was quiet for a long time, and I could see him recalibrating everything he thought he knew about our relationship dynamics. There's more, I said quietly. More what? More that you need to know before tomorrow's meeting. I pulled out the mortgage documentation, the legal brief, the purchase agreement that made me the owner of his family's home loan. 6 months ago, your parents' mortgage appeared in a database of distressed loans. Their lender was selling off problematic assets, and I purchased it as a business investment. The color drained from Marcus's face as he absorbed the implications. You own my parents' mortgage? I own the debt on their house, yes. They don't know it. The purchase was made through my LLC and the servicing is handled by a third party. But legally, financially, I am their mortgage holder. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. How long have you known about their financial problems? I've suspected for months. The signs were obvious if he knew what to look for, but I didn't realize how serious things were until I saw the purchase opportunity. And you bought it anyway? His tone was carefully neutral, but I could sense the conflict underneath. I bought it because it was a sound business decision. A distressed mortgage with good collateral and potential for positive restructuring. But you knew it was my family. Yes, and you didn't think to mention this to me? I didn't mention it because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Like I'd done something wrong by being financially sophisticated enough to recognize and act on an investment opportunity. Marcus turned to face me, and I could see 3 years of assumptions crumbling in his eyes. Do you understand what this means? What it does to the family dynamic? It means your parents' financial security depends on maintaining a civil relationship with someone they've spent 3 years calling incompetent. It means they can't dismiss me as a gold digger when I literally hold the deed to their lifestyle. It means you have power over them. Yes, it does. The same kind of power they've been wielding over me, except mine is legal, documented, and based on actual financial capability rather than inherited snobbery. Marcus sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. They're going to lose their minds when they find out. Probably. The question is whether you're going to support me or them when that happens. He looked up at me with something that might have been panic. That's not fair. They're my parents. And I'm your partner. Or I thought I was. The engagement ring box seemed to pulse with significance between us. I brought this tonight because I wanted to propose, Marcus said quietly. I wanted to show you how committed I am to our future. But now you're not sure. Now I'm not sure about anything. I'm not sure I know who you are. I'm not sure how to process the fact that you've been keeping huge secrets from me. I'm not sure how my family is going to survive this revelation. Let me help you with the uncertainty, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You know exactly who I am. You've just been choosing not to see it. I'm the woman who built a successful business while your parents question my competence. I'm the woman who earned every dollar she has while they inherited theirs and squandered it on appearances. Marcus was silent, processing the weight of what I've revealed. As for secrets, I continued, I kept my business success private because your family created an environment where my achievements were consistently minimized or ignored. I kept the mortgage purchase private because it was a legitimate business decision that didn't require their approval or yours. But we're supposed to be partners. Exactly. Partners. That means you support my professional decisions even when they're inconvenient for your family. It means you defend me when I'm being attacked, not make excuses for the attackers afterward. He picked up the engagement ring box, turning it over in his hands. I love you, Mindy. I have since the day we met. But this, he gestured at the documents spread across the coffee table. This changes everything. It doesn't change anything about who I am or how I feel about you. It just reveals who I've always been underneath the assumptions everyone made about me. My parents are going to think you manipulated this whole situation. Your parents are going to think whatever protects their egos and maintains their victim narrative. The question is what you're going to think. Marcus stood up again, clearly struggling with conflicting loyalties. They're not bad people, Mindy. They're cruel people who use their perceived social superiority to hurt others. That makes them bad people, Marcus. Good people don't systematically humiliate someone for 3 years. They were protecting me. From what? From a woman who loves you, supports your career, and happens to be more financially successful than anyone in your family realized? What exactly were they protecting you from? The truth hung between us like a challenge. Marcus had spent 3 years making excuses for behavior that was inexcusable, finding reasonable explanations for unreasonable cruelty. I need time to process this, he said finally. You've had 3 years to process their treatment of me. You've chosen to ignore it, minimize it, excuse it. Now you have one night to decide whether you're ready to be the partner I need or whether you're going to continue prioritizing their comfort over our relationship. I gathered the mortgage documents, sliding them back into their folder. Tomorrow's meeting is happening whether you support me or not. Your parents are going to learn that the woman they've been calling a loser owns their house. They're going to discover that their financial security depends on treating me with respect. And if they can't handle that, then they'll face the consequences of their financial irresponsibility and their personal cruelty. I'm not responsible for protecting them from reality. Marcus picked up the engagement ring box and stood to leave. I don't know what to say. Say you'll choose us over them. Say you'll finally stand up for our relationship. Say you understand that love requires courage, not just good intentions. He paused at the door, looking back at me with eyes full of confusion and conflict. What if I can't? What if this destroys my relationship with my family? Then you'll know where your priorities really lie, and so will I. After he left, I sat alone with the documents that would change everything tomorrow night. The mortgage papers that proved my competence, the business statements that demonstrated my success, the legal brief that outlined my power over people who'd assumed they were superior to me. Marcus had brought an engagement ring to show his commitment. But he'd left without proposing, carrying his confusion and divided loyalties back to his childhood bedroom. The boy who'd never learned to stand up to his parents was being forced to choose between them and the woman he claimed to love. I understood his conflict, even sympathized with it, but I also knew that some choices couldn't be avoided forever, and some tests of character couldn't be postponed indefinitely. Tomorrow. The Whitmans would learn that their financial future was controlled by someone they'd never bothered to understand or respect. Tomorrow, Marcus would discover whether his love was strong enough to overcome his fear of family conflict. The engagement ring had represented a future built on hope and compromise. But the future we'd actually build, if we built one at all, would be based on truth, respect, and the courage to defend what mattered most. Whether Marcus possessed that courage remained to be seen. The mortgage payment coupon book sat in the center of Sarah's conference table like physical proof of a revolution in progress. 3 years of humiliation were about to be answered with 23 pages of legal documentation that would forever alter the Whitman family dynamic. Patricia arrived first, her designer handbag clutched defensively as she surveyed the law office conference room. She dressed for battle in her most expensive suit, every piece of jewelry calculated to project authority and status. Robert followed, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting, clearly wondering why his son's girlfriend had called a meeting that required legal representation. Marcus entered last, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He'd barely spoken to me since last night's revelation, and his body language screamed conflict and confusion. Before we begin, I said, standing at the head of the polished table, I want to thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, but recent events have made it clear that we need to address some fundamental misunderstandings. Patricia's smile was razor sharp. Well, this is certainly dramatic, dear. Though I'm not sure why we need to allow your presence for a family discussion. Because this isn't just a family discussion, I replied calmly. It's also a business meeting. I practiced this opening dozens of times, but actually delivering it felt surreal. Here were the people who'd spent 3 years making me feel small and worthless, sitting in chairs that positioned them as supplicants while I controlled the agenda. Sunday's dinner made several things clear, I continued. First, that you have significant misconceptions about my professional capabilities. Second, that you've been operating under false assumptions about my financial situation. And third, that these misconceptions have been used to justify treating me with disrespect that I will no longer tolerate. Robert leaned back in his chair with barely concealed irritation. Mindy, I appreciate that your feelings were hurt, but calling a formal meeting seems... Let me show you why a formal meeting was necessary. I interrupted, pulling out my business portfolio. For the next 15 minutes, I walked them through Adams Financial Consulting's growth and success. Client testimonials praising my expertise, financial statements showing annual revenues that exceeded Marcus's law firm salary, professional certifications that qualified me to handle complex investment strategies, The silence grew heavier with each document I presented. Patricia's confident smirk faded as she realized the scope of what I built. Robert's dismissive attitude crumbled as he recognized financial sophistication that surpassed his own. "This is impressive work," Robert finally admitted, his voice notably subdued. "I had no idea you'd built such a substantial practice." "Because you never asked," I replied. "You made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts, then used those assumptions to justify dismissive treatment." Patricia rallied slightly. "Well, it's wonderful that your little side business has done well, but I'm not sure why." "It's not a side business," I cut her off. "It's a thriving financial consulting firm with over 200 clients and 7-figure annual revenues. It's also the vehicle through which I made the investment that brings us to the real purpose of this meeting." I pulled out the mortgage documentation, arranging it carefully on the table. "6 months ago, your mortgage lender sold your loan to investors as part of a distressed asset portfolio. The loan was purchased by Adams Financial Holdings, LLC, my company, for $720,000. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Patricia's face went white. Robert's mouth fell open. Marcus, who'd known this was coming, still looked. "Sick. You." Patricia started, then stopped, apparently unable to process what she'd heard. "I own your mortgage," I said clearly. "Your monthly payments of $8,247 are made to me. Your home's financial security depends on my decisions as your lender." Robert found his voice first. "That's impossible." "We would have been notified. You were notified that your mortgage was sold to new investors. You weren't told the identity of those investors because you had no legal right to that information." I pulled out the payment coupon book, showing them their own account numbers and payment history. "You've been 3 days late on your last 2 payments. Your account shows a pattern of financial stress that originally made your loan attractive to investors looking for discounted assets." Patricia was staring at the documents like they might disappear if she concentrated hard enough. "This is some kind of mistake. Our financial advisor would have told us." "Your financial advisor probably doesn't know who purchased your mortgage from the bank. That information isn't typically disclosed to borrowers." The reality was sinking in, and I could see the exact moment when the power dynamic shifted in their minds. The woman they called a financial burden was literally paying for their privilege of living in their own home. "What do you want?" Robert asked quietly. "I want what I've always wanted, to be treated with basic human respect. I want acknowledgement that your assumptions about my capabilities were wrong. And I want assurance that the pattern of dismissive, condescending treatment will end immediately." Patricia had recovered enough to attempt damage control. "Now, Mindy, I think you may have misinterpreted some of our conversations." "I misinterpreted nothing. You've spent 3 years questioning my competence, dismissing my achievements, and making it clear that you consider me unworthy of your son. You've used your perceived social and financial superiority as weapons to make me feel inferior." We're just concerned about Marcus's future. You were protecting their sense of superiority by diminishing someone you saw as a threat to your family hierarchy. The irony is that while you were questioning my ability to contribute to Marcus's life, I was building the kind of financial success you only pretend to have. Marcus finally spoke up. "What happens now?" I looked at him. This man I'd loved for 3 years, who was finally being forced to see his family clearly. "That depends on whether your parents can accept reality and adjust their behavior accordingly. And if we can't," Patricia asked, some of her old defiance returning, "then you'll deal with me as your mortgage holder rather than as a family member. I'll exercise my full legal rights as your lender, which include requiring detailed financial disclosure, approving any additional borrowing secured by the property, and potentially restructuring your loan terms." The threat was implicit, but clear. I didn't need to mention foreclosure. They were smart enough to understand the ultimate consequences of defaulting on a mortgage held by someone they'd systematically abused. "You planned this," Robert said, his voice heavy with realization. "You deliberately targeted our loan. I recognized a business opportunity involving people who'd been treating me badly. I chose to pursue it because I'm not the naive, powerless victim you assumed I was." "It feels manipulative," Patricia said weakly. No more manipulative than using inherited wealth to make someone feel inferior. No more deceptive than pretending to have financial wisdom while your own house is mortgaged to pay credit card bills. The mortgage payment coupon book sat between us like evidence in a trial, proof that everything they believed about our relative positions was exactly backwards. So what now? Marcus asked again. Now you decide, I said, looking at each of them in turn. You can acknowledge that your treatment of me was unacceptable. Commit to genuine respect and inclusion and work with me to restructure your mortgage on favorable terms. Or you can continue defending your past behavior and deal with me strictly as a business relationship. Those sound like ultimatums, Robert said. They're choices. The same choices you had 3 years ago when you decided to treat me like an unwelcome intruder rather than your son's partner. The conference room fell quiet except for the sound of Patricia's nervous breathing and the rustle of papers as Robert examined the mortgage documents. The woman who called me, Insubstantial, was learning exactly how substantial $847,000 in mortgage debt could be when held by someone with both the legal authority and personal motivation to use it strategically. The family meeting that was supposed to address their concerns about me had become a reckoning with the reality of who actually held the power in our relationship. The apology letter arrived by express mail the next morning, written in Patricia's careful script on her personal stationery. For the first time in 3 years, her words to me carried no hidden barbs, no backhanded compliments, no subtle dismissals. Dear Mindy, it began. I have spent the entire night reflecting on yesterday's meeting and our family's behavior over the past 3 years. I owe you an apology that is long overdue and completely inadequate for the hurt we have caused. I read it twice before calling Marcus, who answered on the first ring. Did you know your mother was writing to me? I asked. She was up until 3 a.m. working on it. Dad's been pacing the house since breakfast. I think they're both in shock. And you? I'm processing, still processing. The formal tone in his voice told me everything about where his loyalties currently lay. Marcus was protecting himself by maintaining distance from everyone involved, including me. Your mother's letter is surprisingly honest, I said, scanning Patricia's careful admission of wrongdoing. She's scared, Marcus admitted. They both are. They don't know what you're going to do with the mortgage, and they're panicking about their financial situation. Are you scared too? Of you? No. Of losing my family? Yes. That answer crystallized everything wrong with our dynamic. After 3 years together, after learning about my business success, after seeing documented proof of his parents' cruelty, Marcus was still more worried about losing people who treated me terribly than about supporting the woman you claimed to love. I'm not trying to destroy your family, Marcus. I'm trying to join it on equal terms. I think I know. It's just, this is a lot to absorb. Patricia's letter continued for 2 pages. Acknowledging specific incidents I'd almost forgotten, but she'd apparently cataloged with guilty precision. The Christmas gifts that were deliberately impersonal. The way she'd excluded me from family. Planning discussions. The comments about my background and prospects that were designed to make me feel inferior. I realize now that our behavior stemmed from our own insecurities and fears, she wrote. We were threatened by your obvious intelligence and independence, and we responded by trying to diminish you rather than examining our own shortcomings. This was wrong, and I am deeply ashamed. The letter felt genuine, though I wondered how. Much of Patricia's contrition came from fear versus actual understanding. When someone discovers that their housing security depends on the goodwill of someone they've been abusing, apologies tend to arrive quickly. Robert's response was more direct. He called that afternoon. I want to discuss the mortgage situation. He said without preamble, from a business perspective, I'm listening. Our current payment is $8,247 per month at a variable rate. That's scheduled to increase again in 6 months. We've been struggling to maintain those payments, which is obviously why the loan appeared on distressed asset list. His admission of financial difficulty represented a complete reversal from 3 years of pretending everything was fine. What are you proposing? I'd like to explore modification options. Lower payments, fixed rate, extended terms, whatever might work for both parties. And from a personal perspective, I asked. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I owe you an apology. We both do. We made assumptions about you that were completely wrong, and we used those assumptions to justify behavior that was unacceptable. What changed your mind? Seeing the scope of what you've built professionally, understanding that while we were questioning your competence, you were demonstrating financial sophistication that puts our own decision-making to shame. And if I hadn't purchased your mortgage, if you'd learned about my business success some other way, another pause, I'd like to think we would have eventually recognized our mistakes. But honestly, probably not. We were too invested in our prejudices to examine them voluntarily. At least he was being honest. I'm willing to discuss mortgage modification, I said, but I need to know that the personal relationship issues are being addressed separately. This isn't about using financial leverage to force politeness. Understood. Patricia's letter represents genuine regret, not strategic positioning. We know we need to earn your forgiveness, and we know that's separate from any business arrangements. That evening, I met with Sarah to discuss the family's responses and potential next steps. They're reacting better than I expected, she said, reviewing Patricia's letter and my notes from Robert's call. Admitting fault, requesting business discussions rather than demanding family considerations, acknowledging the separation between personal and financial issues. It feels too easy, I admitted. 3 years of cruelty, then one night of revelation, and suddenly they're model family members. People can change quickly when their fundamental assumptions are shattered. The question is whether the change is genuine or just expedient. How do I tell the difference? Time. Watch their behavior over the coming months. See how they treat you when the shock wears off, when they've had time to develop new patterns rather than just reacting to crisis. Sarah had prepared a preliminary mortgage modification proposal that would reduce the Whitmans' monthly payments to $6,500, fix their interest rate at current market levels, and extend the loan term to improve their cash flow situation. It's genuinely favorable terms, she explained. Better than they could get from any traditional lender given their financial history. But it also establishes your ongoing role in their lives, and if their behavior reverts to old patterns, then you have legal remedies. You can modify the terms, require additional disclosures, or exercise other mortgage holder rights. The key is maintaining professional boundaries while rebuilding personal relationships. That night, Marcus came over. For the first real conversation we'd had since the revelation. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, about choosing between you and them. And I think I've been approaching it wrong. It's not about choosing sides, it's about choosing what kind of person I want to be. What kind of partner, what kind of son, what kind of man. He seemed more grounded than he had in days, less conflicted about fundamental questions. I want to be the kind of person who stands up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The kind of partner who defends you when you're being attacked, not just apologizes afterward. The kind of son who holds his parents accountable for their behavior rather than enabling it. That sounds good in theory, I said carefully. But what does it look like in practice? It looks like me telling my parents that their apologies need to be backed up by sustained behavioral change. It looks like me setting clear boundaries about how they're allowed to treat you. It looks like me supporting your decisions about the mortgage modification without trying to mediate or soften consequences of their actions. I studied his face, looking for the weakness and conflict that had characterized our relationship for 3 years. Instead, I saw something I hadn't seen before: genuine resolve. And if they can't handle those boundaries, then they'll face the consequences. I love them, but I won't sacrifice our relationship to protect them from reality anymore. The apology letter sat on my kitchen counter, proof that people could acknowledge wrongdoing when forced to confront evidence of their mistakes. Whether that acknowledgement would translate into lasting change remained to be seen, but for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was dealing with a family that saw me as an equal rather than an intruder. For the first time since we started dating, Marcus was acting like a true partner rather than a conflicted mediator. The mortgage modification would provide them Financial relief while establishing my ongoing authority. The personal relationships would rebuild slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. The letter represented a beginning, not an ending. The real test would come in the months ahead, when the shock of revelation faded and everyone had to live with the new reality of our forever changed family dynamic. The new family photo sat in the same spot on the mantelpiece where the old one had been, but everything about it was different. This time, I stood next to Marcus in the center of the frame, no longer relegated to the edge or excluded entirely. Patricia's smile looked genuine rather than forced, and Robert's arm rested comfortably on my shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. The photo represented more than improved family dynamics. It documented a fundamental shift in how the Whitmans operated as a unit. Where once they'd used exclusion and condescension to maintain hierarchy, they now actively work to include me in decision-making and family planning. Mindy, what do you think about the Hamptons house for Labor Day weekend? Patricia asked during our first Sunday dinner since the revelation. The question itself was revolutionary. Not only was she soliciting my opinion, but she was assuming I'd be included in family vacation plans. I think it sounds lovely, I replied, still adjusting to this new reality where my preferences mattered. Robert had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The man who'd once lectured me about market saturation in financial services now regularly sought my professional advice. 2 weeks after our conference room meeting, he'd asked me to review his retirement portfolio. I've made some questionable investment decisions, he'd admitted, spreading his statements across my kitchen table. I could use someone with actual expertise to help me understand where I went wrong. The portfolio was even worse than I'd suspected. High-fee mutual funds, speculative stocks, an over-concentration in medical sector investments that tied his retirement to the same industry trends that were already undermining his practice. It was the kind of financial planning that looked sophisticated but actually represented a fundamental misunderstanding of risk management. We can fix this, I told him, mapping out a restructuring strategy that would diversify his holdings, reduce fees, and create more stable long-term growth. But it's going to require admitting that some of your assumptions about investing were wrong. Most of my assumptions about everything were wrong, he'd replied with surprising humility. The mortgage modification had provided them with breathing room to address their broader financial problems. The reduced monthly payment freed up $1,700 that we redirected toward paying down credit card debt. The fixed interest rate eliminated the anxiety of rising payments. The extended loan term improved their debt-to-income ratios, enough to qualify for better terms on other obligations, but the most significant change wasn't financial, it was relational. Patricia had stopped making subtle digs about my background or prospects. Instead, she'd begun asking genuine questions about my work, my opinions, my experiences. The woman who'd once explained Italian cuisine to me like I was a child now consulted me about investment strategies for her charitable foundation. I never realized how much I didn't know about finance, she confessed during one of our conversations. I always assumed that having money meant understanding money, but you've shown me how naive that assumption was. The shift in Marcus was equally profound. The weak, conflicted mediator had been replaced by someone who actively defended our relationship and set clear boundaries with his family. When Patricia occasionally slipped into old patterns of subtle condescension, Marcus immediately called her out. "Mom, that comment about Mindy's apartment was inappropriate," he'd said firmly during a recent dinner. "If you have concerns about something, address them directly and respectfully, or don't address them at all." The old Marcus would have tried to smooth over the moment, make excuses for his mother's behavior, ask me privately to overlook the slight. The new Marcus confronted problems directly and supported me publicly. "I should have been doing this from the beginning," he told me later. "I was so afraid of family conflict that I let you absorb all the abuse. That was cowardly and I'm sorry." His evolution as a partner extended beyond family dynamics. Marcus had begun taking genuine interest in my business, asking detailed questions about client strategies, market trends, and growth opportunities. He'd even referred several colleagues who needed financial planning services. "I'm proud of what you've built," he'd said, reviewing my latest quarterly statements. I should have been celebrating your success all along instead of hiding it to protect my parents' egos. The family game nights that had once been exercises in subtle exclusion became genuinely enjoyable evenings. Patricia no longer made jokes at my expense or excluded me from inside references. Robert included me in discussions about current events, politics, and professional topics. Marcus no longer spent the evening managing tensions and apologizing for slights. This is what family dinner should feel like, I told Marcus after a particularly pleasant evening, like everyone actually wants to be there with everyone else. The most telling change was how they discussed our relationship with others. Previously, Patricia would introduce me as Marcus's friend or mention me only when directly asked. Now, she spoke proudly about our daughter-in-law-to-be and bragged about my professional accomplishments to her social circle. Patricia was telling the country club ladies about your business, Robert reported with amusement. She's become quite the advocate for your consulting services. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The same woman who'd once questioned my competence was now recommending me to her wealthy friends as a financial advisor. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the private conversation Patricia and I had 6 weeks after the revelation. I need you to understand something, she'd said during a quiet moment while Marcus and Robert were watching football. The way we treated you wasn't really about you. It was about our own fears and insecurities. What do you mean? We were threatened by your intelligence, your independence, your obvious competence. You represented everything we'd failed to teach Marcus to value genuine substance over inherited privilege, earn success over social connections. She'd paused, choosing her words carefully. We were also afraid that if Marcus saw what real strength and capability looked like, he'd realize how shallow our own achievements were. So we tried to diminish you to protect our own sense of importance. That's a remarkably honest self-assessment. It's taken me 3 years to reach it. I'm not proud of how long it took or what it took to get here. The new family photo captured all of these changes in a single frame. The rigid hierarchy had been replaced by genuine affection. The careful positioning designed to exclude had been replaced by natural grouping that included everyone equally. The photo also represented something deeper, proof that people could change, that relationships could heal, that power dynamics could shift when truth replaced assumption and respect replaced condescension. 6 months earlier, I'd been the unwelcome outsider hoping for basic courtesy. Now I was a valued family member whose opinions mattered, whose success was celebrated, whose presence was genuinely desired. The mortgage modification had given them financial stability. The revelation of my success had given them perspective on their prejudices. But the real transformation had come from everyone's willingness to acknowledge past mistakes and commit to better behavior moving forward. The new photo would sit on that mantelpiece for years to come, a reminder of what was possible when people chose growth over pride, truth over comfort, and inclusion over exclusion. The shared recipe card was covered in Patricia's neat handwriting and my hurried notes as she taught me to make her grandmother's osso buco, the same dish she'd once used to emphasize my cultural inadequacy. Now it represented something entirely different, an invitation into family tradition, a gesture of genuine inclusion. The secret is browning the meat properly, Patricia explained, guiding my hands as I turned the veal shanks in the hot oil. My grandmother always said patience here determines the entire dish's success. 8 months had passed since the conference room revelation, and we were finally having the kind of conversation I dreamed of during those early, hopeful days of dating Marcus. No hidden barbs, no subtle tests, no performance of tolerance, masking resentment. I owe you another apology, Patricia said quietly as we waited for the vegetables to soften. Not just for how we treated you, but for what we stole from all of us. What do you mean? We could have been having conversations like this for 3 years. We could have been learning from each other, enjoying each other's company, building genuine relationships. Instead, we wasted all that time protecting our egos. The family therapy sessions had helped us understand the deeper dynamics that had driven their behavior. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a specialist in family systems, had guided The U.S. through months of difficult conversations about class, privilege, fear, and change. The Whitman family operated on a rigid hierarchy that equated financial success with personal worth. She'd explained during one session. When Mindy challenged that hierarchy, not through aggression, but through competence, it threatened their entire worldview. We weren't just rejecting Mindy, Robert had admitted during a particularly breakthrough session. We were rejecting evidence that our assumptions about success, worth, and social value were fundamentally flawed. Dr. Martinez had helped them understand that their cruelty stemmed from profound insecurity about their own achievements. Robert's medical practice was failing because he'd refused to adapt to changing healthcare landscapes. Patricia's social standing was built on inherited wealth rather than personal accomplishment. They'd used their perceived superiority over me to avoid confronting their own failures and limitations. When someone earns success through intelligence and hard work, Dr. Martinez had said, it highlights the difference between achievement and inheritance. That can be threatening to people whose status depends on circumstances rather than capability. The therapy had been difficult for everyone, but especially for Patricia and Robert. Confronting 3 years of cruel behavior required acknowledging how their own fears and prejudices had shaped their actions. I was raised to believe that social class was a measure of personal quality. Patricia had confessed during one session. My parents taught me that people from our background were simply better, smarter, more refined, more deserving. Admitting that was wrong meant questioning everything I'd been taught about myself and my place in the world. But the hardest conversation had been about their financial situation and how shame about their declining circumstances had amplified their need to feel superior to someone. We were drowning financially, Robert had admitted, but we couldn't acknowledge it because our entire identity was built on being successful. Taking out the mortgage, missing payments, relying on credit cards, it was all evidence that we weren't who we pretended to be. So you needed someone to look down on, I'd replied, finally understanding the psychology behind their cruelty. We needed someone who made us feel like we were still on top of the hierarchy, even when we were falling off the bottom. Patricia had said with painful honesty that Marcus had his own work to do in therapy, confronting his pattern of conflict avoidance and his role in enabling his parents' behavior. I told myself I was keeping the peace, he'd said during one particularly intense session. But really, I was just taking the easy path. It was easier to ask Mindy to be patient with abuse than to stand up to my parents and risk their disapproval. Dr. Martinez had helped him understand that his people-pleasing behavior wasn't kindness, it was cowardice that allowed harmful dynamics to continue unchallenged. Love requires courage, she told him, echoing words I'd said months earlier. It requires being willing to have difficult conversations, set boundaries, and sometimes accept that you can't make everyone happy. The breakthrough moment had come during a session about financial anxiety and family shame. Patricia had broken down completely, sobbing as she confessed her terror about their deteriorating circumstances. We've been pretending everything was fine while watching our world collapse, she'd cried. The house, the practice, our retirement, everything was falling apart. And we couldn't admit it because admitting failure felt like dying. So you made Mindy carry the shame you couldn't bear to feel about yourselves. Dr. Martinez had observed that was when the real healing began. Not just apologies for specific incidents, but understanding of the deeper patterns that had made those incidents inevitable. The recipe card represented the fruits of that healing. Patricia's decision to share her grandmother's recipe wasn't just about cooking. It was about welcoming me into family history, including me in traditions that had previously been used to emphasize my outsider status. My grandmother would have loved you, Patricia said as we tasted the braising liquid. She was a strong woman who built something from nothing, like you. Tell me about her. For the next hour, as the osso buco simmered, Patricia shared stories about her grandmother's immigration to America, her struggle to establish herself in a new country, her determination to provide better opportunities for her children. She would have been ashamed of how we treated you, Patricia admitted. She knew what it meant to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. She would have recognized your strength and celebrated your achievements. The irony was profound. The woman Patricia held up as the family's moral foundation would have embraced the qualities in me that Patricia had initially rejected, I think. I spent so many years focusing on what separated us from people like you that I forgot what my grandmother actually valued, Patricia continued. She didn't care about pedigrees or social connections. She cared about character, work ethic, and the courage to build something meaningful. The shared recipe card became a symbol of everything that had changed between us. Where once Patricia had used cultural knowledge as a weapon to make me feel inferior, she now shared it as a gift to make me feel included. Robert had undergone his own transformation through the therapy process. The man who'd once dismissed my professional expertise now regularly sought my advice, not just about investments, but about adapting his medical practice to changing market conditions. I've been practicing medicine the same way for 20 years, he confessed during one of our conversations. I thought experience was enough, but you've shown me that adaptability matters more than tradition. Together, we developed a plan to modernize his practice while gradually transitioning toward retirement. Electronic health records, telemedicine options, partnerships with younger physicians who understood current healthcare trends. It was the kind of strategic thinking that could have saved his practice years earlier if pride hadn't prevented him from seeking help. I always assumed that asking for advice was a sign of weakness, he'd admitted. Now I realize that refusing to learn from people smarter than you is what real weakness looks like. The family therapy had also revealed how much Marcus's conflict avoidance had damaged our relationship in ways I'd never fully articulated. Dr. Martinez had helped us understand that his pattern of keeping the peace had actually created more conflict by allowing problems to fester and grow. Every time you asked me to be patient with your parents' behavior, I'd told him during one session, you were asking me to absorb abuse to make your life easier. That's not protecting me, that's sacrificing me. Marcus had struggled with this reality, but eventually came to understand that his well-intentioned mediation had actually enabled his parents' worst impulses while leaving me to bear the emotional cost of their dysfunction. I thought I was being diplomatic, he'd said, but really I was being selfish. It was easier to ask you to tolerate mistreatment than to risk confronting my parents and facing their anger. The therapy had taught us all to communicate more directly, to address problems when they were small rather than letting them escalate, and to prioritize honesty over comfort. Healthy families have conflict, Dr. Martinez had explained. They disagree, they argue, they work through problems together. Unhealthy families avoid conflict until it explodes, or sacrifice individual members to maintain artificial peace. The osso buco recipe represented everything we'd learned about building genuine relationships. Like the dish itself, real intimacy required patience, careful attention, and the willingness to tend something slowly over time rather than rushing toward immediate results. I want you to have this recipe, Patricia said, carefully writing out the final instructions. I want you to make it for your own family someday, and I want you to tell your children about the woman who taught it to you. Even if that woman treated you terribly at first, especially then. I want them to know that people can change, that families can heal, that it's never too late to choose love over fear. As we sat down to eat the meal we prepared together, I reflected on how much had changed since that first Sunday dinner 3 years ago. Then I'd been desperately trying to prove my worthiness to people who'd already decided I wasn't good enough. Now, I was sharing family traditions of people who genuinely valued my presence in their lives. The mortgage situation had provided the catalyst for change, but the real transformation had come through everyone's willingness to do the hard work of examining their behavior and committing to growth. Robert had learned to see strength in vulnerability, to ask for help when he needed it, to value competence over pedigree. Patricia had confronted her prejudices about class and worth, learned to appreciate qualities she'd previously dismissed, found the courage to build genuine relationships rather than maintain artificial hierarchies. Marcus had developed the backbone to stand up for what mattered, to have difficult conversations, to choose courage over comfort when protecting our relationship required it. And I'd learned something too, that holding on to anger and resentment would have prevented the very healing I'd hoped to achieve. The power I gained through owning their mortgage was less important than the wisdom to use that power constructively, rather than destructively. The shared recipe card would sit in my kitchen for years to come, stained with cooking oils and marked with personal notes, a tangible reminder of what was possible when people chose growth over pride, understanding over judgment, and inclusion over exclusion. As we laughed together over dinner, sharing stories and making plans for the future, I realized that this was what I'd been fighting for all along, not revenge or dominance, but simply the chance to be seen, valued, and included as an equal member of a family that finally understood what true worth really meant. The wedding invitation in my hands was everything I dreamed of during those dark months when I wondered if Marcus and I would survive his family's opposition. Elegant but not ostentatious, warm but not saccharine, it announced our engagement, with the genuine blessing and excitement of people who'd learned to see our love as something to celebrate rather than endure. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Whitman, along with Mr. and Mrs. David Adams, request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their children, Marcus Robert Whitman and Mindy Elizabeth Adams. Both sets of parents listed equally, both families claiming. Use with pride. It was a small detail that represented everything that had changed in the year since that devastating Sunday. Dinner. Marcus proposed on the anniversary of the conference room revelation, exactly 1 year after the night that had changed everything. He'd chosen the same law office conference room where I'd revealed the mortgage situation, transforming a space associated with conflict into one representing new beginnings. I want to propose here because this is where we finally started being honest with each other, he'd said, kneeling beside the same table where the mortgage documents had been spread. This is where we chose truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. The rain was beautiful but not extravagant to classic solitaire. That reflected my practical nature while honoring the significance of the moment. More importantly, the proposal itself was everything I'd hoped for. Heartfelt, genuine, backed by a year of demonstrated change rather than empty promises. I want to marry you not despite what happened with my family, but because of how you handled it, Marcus had said. You could have used your power to hurt us, but instead you used it to heal us. You taught us all what real strength looks like. Patricia had cried when we called to share the news, but they were tears of joy rather than resignation. I'm so happy, she'd sobbed over the phone. I'm so grateful that we didn't lose you, that you gave us a chance to become better people. The mortgage situation had evolved into something none of us had anticipated. Rather than exercising my authority as a creditor, I gradually transitioned into the role of financial advisor and family partner. The monthly payments continued, but they were now part of a comprehensive financial plan that was actually improving the Whitmans' long-term security. Robert's practice had stabilized under the modernization plan we developed together. Patricia had learned to manage money based on actual income rather than imagined wealth. Their credit card debt was nearly eliminated. Their retirement planning was back on track, and their relationship with money had shifted from denial to realistic optimism. You saved us from financial ruin, Robert had told me during one of our quarterly planning sessions. But more than that, you saved us from the kind of people we were becoming. 6 months before the wedding, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I offered to transfer the mortgage back to them at favorable terms, essentially selling them back their own house at a significant discount. You don't need to do that, Patricia had protested. The mortgage arrangement is working fine for everyone. I know I don't need to, I'd replied, but I want our relationship to be based on choice rather than financial obligation. I want you to include me in family decisions because you value my perspective, not because I have leverage over you. The gesture had meant more to them than any apology or gift could have. It demonstrated that my goals had never been about power or control, but about respect and genuine connection. This is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for us, Robert had said, his voice thick with emotion. You're giving us back our independence while keeping our family together. Marcus had been amazed by the decision. You're giving up a profitable investment and significant leverage. Are you sure about this? I'm sure. Real relationships can't be built on financial dependency. If we're going to be a family, It needs to be because we choose each other, not because circumstances force us together. The wedding planning had become an opportunity to demonstrate how much our dynamics had changed. Patricia and my mother worked together seamlessly, each bringing their strengths to the process without competition or conflict. Robert and my father discovered a shared love of golf and began playing together regularly. The forced politeness of early family gatherings had been replaced by genuine friendship. I love watching our parents together. Marcus had observed during one planning session. They're actually enjoying each other's company, not just tolerating it for our sake. The guest list reflected the integration of our two worlds. My clients and colleagues mixed with Marcus's law firm partners. My college friends shared tables with Patricia's country club acquaintances. The divide between our backgrounds had become a bridge, connecting different communities and perspectives. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the wedding planning was how naturally Patricia and I had begun collaborating on details large and small. The woman who'd once questioned my taste now sought my opinions on everything from flowers to music. "I trust your judgment completely," she'd said when I'd expressed concern about a particular vendor. "You have excellent instincts about these things." The rehearsal dinner speech Robert gave captured the journey we'd all taken together. "A year ago, I thought I knew what was best for my son," he'd said, looking directly at me. "I thought I understood what kind of person would make him happy, what kind of partner would complement his life. I was wrong about almost everything." He paused, his voice growing stronger with emotion. "Mindy didn't just prove me wrong, she taught me what I should have been looking for all along. Not someone who would fit into our existing family structure, but someone who would make that structure better. Not someone who would accept our limitations, but someone who would help us grow beyond them." The applause that followed wasn't polite obligation. It was genuine appreciation from people who'd witnessed our transformation. As I stood at the altar the next day, looking at Marcus's face as he promised to choose courage over comfort, growth over stagnation, truth over convenience, I reflected on everything that had brought us to this moment. The woman who'd once trembled with rage at a family dinner was now surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated her presence. The family that had once used exclusion and condescension to maintain hierarchy now operated as a true partnership of equals. The mortgage that had started as a business investment and become a tool for justice had ultimately transformed into something none of us had expected, a catalyst for the kind of growth that made real love possible. When Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger, making our partnership official in the eyes of everyone who mattered to us, I knew that we built something worth fighting for. Not just a marriage, but a family based on mutual respect, honest communication, and the courage to keep growing together. The wedding invitation had announced our marriage, but it really celebrated something much bigger, the triumph of authenticity. Over assumption, of substance, over snobbery, of over fear. As we danced together as husband and wife, surrounded by family and friends who'd witnessed our journey from conflict to celebration, I realized that the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's helping them become better people while building something beautiful together. The trembling fork had marked the end of accepting unacceptable treatment. The wedding dance marked the beginning of a future built on the solid foundation of truth, respect, and the kind of love that makes everyone involved better than they were before.